Hi guys, welcome to the tutorial. Continuing this theme of emotional intelligence, we're going to see how that is applied in a really common interaction in business, which is feedback. So either giving feedback or receiving feedback, and how to do that in an emotionally intelligent, empathetic and professional way, whether you are giving or receiving the feedback. So why is feedback such an important part of leadership, first of all? Well, it can be seen as a key to growth, performance and trust. Feedback drives personal and professional development, improves team performance and builds mutual trust between leaders and employees, if it's done well. Feedback encourages open communication. Leaders who promote feedback create transparent environments where team members feel safe to express ideas and concerns. Regular feedback is really important. Consistent feedback helps keep goals aligned, addresses issues early and motivates continuous improvement within teams. Accepting feedback is really important. Now, if you work in management, you will have people below you in the hierarchy, certainly, but you probably still have someone above you in the hierarchy too, especially you work for a big company, up until you get to the point of, the CEO. Someone's boss is always someone else's boss, right? So there is that pyramid. There's, very often people below you and above you. So you have to give and receive feedback professionally. Leaders should welcome feedback with an open mind, demonstrating professionalism by considering input without defensiveness. Impact of poor feedback. Poor feedback leads to confusion and low morale. Using positive tone and careful phrasing in business English enhances receptiveness and effectiveness. So we're back to this idea of it's not just the message you give, but how you express the message. So careful word choice in terms of the ideas, hedging language, polite constructions. These are all very important. Now, there are different types of feedback as well. I think usually when we think about feedback, we often think of supervisorial feedback. But there's also what we call upward feedback. So that's feedback that's given from team members to managers, often focusing on leadership style and support. It should be respectful and constructive to encourage positive change. Now, you won't find upward feedback everywhere. It's more likely to occur in some cultures than others, be it corporate culture or general culture. But it is a thing that occurs fairly regularly, upward feedback. Downward feedback, which is feedback from managers to team members aimed at guiding performance and development, requires a clear, firm, yet supportive tone to motivate and build confidence. So downward feedback is usually what we think of when we think of feedback. Peer feedback is feedback exchange between colleagues to improve teamwork and collaboration. Perhaps the tone is a bit less informal, but it must still always be respectful, fostering mutual growth and understanding. It's not an opportunity just to insult your colleague. And a theme that we've come back to at different points in the course is the appropriacy of tone and formality. Always polite, always respectful, always supportive, always constructive, whether that's going upward, downward, or let's say horizontally in terms of peer feedback. The exact choice of language depends on the situation, depends on the prevailing culture, but sort of universal truths would be polite, supportive, constructive. Some key vocabulary for you guys to take a note of in the field of feedback. So it was called constructive criticism. Now, constructive criticism is feedback aimed at improving performance by highlighting specific areas and offering helpful suggestions for growth. So it's not just saying you did X, Y, and Z wrong. It's saying you could take these steps in order to improve X, Y, and Z. Appraisal is a formal review process where an employee's performance is evaluated against set objectives and standards. So again, bigger companies will often have these every 6 months or every year, where you look at what the employee was expected to achieve or expected to be capable of, and to what extent they've reached those expectations. Recognition means acknowledging and praising good work to motivate and reinforce positive behaviors within the team. Areas for improvement is the way that weaknesses are often phrased. So rather than saying you're not very good at X, Y, and Z, you say X, Y, and Z are areas for improvement. So you sort of present it as a positive thing. This is something you can work on and develop. And we also have what's called feed forward. So you guys, I'm pretty sure, would be familiar with feedback, but there's also feed forward, which you might be able to figure out, which focuses on future actions and improvements rather than looking back, evaluating what's already passed. So for example, you say, I'd like to offer some feed forward for your next presentation. So rather than saying, I saw your presentation, this is what I think, say, okay, I saw your presentation. For the next presentation, these are some things you could consider. So that is actually feed forward. Something you guys might be aware of is fairly common knowledge in terms of feedback is what we call the feedback sandwich. Sort of in general terms, you might say it's like positive, then negative, then positive again. More precisely, you want to begin with a positive comment, something that your worker or your peer or your boss even potentially has done well that you appreciate. Then a constructive point, something that could be improved potentially. So again, not just saying you did this wrong, you did this badly, but saying, okay, this is an area that could be earmarked for future improvement. And obviously we're using this diplomatic language, this tactful language that we've looked at in different areas of the course. And you end with encouragement to motivate the person to continue improving and reinforce confidence in their abilities. So positive comment, constructive point, which is where you have to be diplomatic, because that's where you might be saying things that you think could be done a little bit better, and then move on to positivity again in the form of encouragement. Some polite and diplomatic phrases for feedback. So we can say that we should be focusing on suggesting rather than instructing, rather than commanding or demanding. So you can phrase things like, I'd suggest, rather than you should. So if there's something you think could be improved, could be developed further, don't sort of try and command it, but phrase it in a way that encourages. Inviting consideration. Have you considered? This is a much better way to open a dialogue than you didn't. So instead of saying, let's for example, you didn't back up the files with a hard copy, say, have you considered next time backing up the files with a hard copy? So not criticizing what was already done, but feeding forward so that future performance can improve. Softening, so again, the sort of hedging language that we've seen elsewhere. One possible improvement might be, now what that really means is one possible improvement is, right, will be, absolutely. But we put it in this politer language. And again, I mentioned this elsewhere, but be alert to that if English is not your first language, because the native speaker will understand the intention behind this very sort of soft phrase. The literal meaning is, you have to do this next time, that will make your work better. So you have to understand the literal meaning is different from the semantic meaning. Highlighting usefulness, it could be useful to, which again means in reality it is useful to, you should, you must, you have to. But again, we're putting this in softer language. And appreciating effort. You can always appreciate effort. I really appreciate the effort you put into, or I really appreciate the time that you put into this project. So it's not really commenting on the quality of the work or the outcomes, but just recognizing that that person put in time and effort, whether or not it was successful. So that's for giving feedback, but we also have to be able to receive feedback. Like I said, you might be a boss, but chances are you got a boss as well. So you got people above and below you in the hierarchy. Keep in mind that feedback is information. View feedback as useful information rather than criticism. That mindset helps you respond objectively and learn from the input. No one likes being criticized. No one likes being told what they did wrong. But you have to go in with positivity and try and make it constructive for yourself. Listen actively. Show engagement by nodding or saying, thanks for pointing that out. This encourages communication and demonstrates respect. So when you're receiving this feedback, you should respond to it proactively and positively and reasonably thankfully, even if you're not particularly enjoying the information that you're getting. Ask clarifying questions. So it makes a general observation. You could say, can you give me an example to look for something more concrete? Let's say a concrete example of a general point. Show appreciation, a value perspective, and then, ideally you want to apply and follow up on this feedback. Implement the suggested changes where possible and check back later to show commitment to improvement and continuous learning. Feedback can be uncomfortable for everyone involved, both the person giving and receiving the feedback. So, it's important that both sides try to maintain politeness and respect, show mutual open communication, let's say, to exchanging ideas. So some functional phrases we can use when we're giving feedback. I've noticed that, and that we can use that to introduce specific observations politely. I've noticed that you're having a bit of trouble making the deadlines. It might help if you to suggest helpful actions constructively. So again, rather than saying you should, you must, you have to, rather than commanding, you're offering this as an observation, as a piece of advice. Next time, try focusing on, so here we're not talking about what the person did wrong or what you don't want them to do, you're talking about what you do want them to do, which psychologically is much easier to hear, rather than telling them what they did wrong, telling them what they can do right. And then when you're receiving feedback, things like, thanks for the feedback, I'll work on that. That's helpful, I didn't realize that. Could you suggest how I might improve in that area? And that's a fair question, because if your feedback is just an observation of what you're doing wrong, it's perfectly legitimate to ask, okay, how would you like this to be? How would you like this to look? So summing it up, feedback should be constructive and forward focused. Feedback should be balanced, highlighting strengths and areas for improvement while focusing on future actions or growth. So it's not about what went wrong before, it's about what can go right in the future. Polite and supportive language. Use courteous and encouraging expressions to maintain respect and promote positive feedback culture. If people feel like they're being attacked, then the whole feedback process becomes very difficult to manage. Openness and receiving feedback. Accept feedback with curiosity and an open mind to learn and improve, avoiding defensiveness. And something to think about. Which phrase will you choose next time when giving or receiving feedback to ensure positive and constructive dialogue? So whatever you think the more likely situation is, or maybe you'll do both. Maybe you'll be giving feedback and maybe you'll be receiving feedback. Think about what it is that we're trying to achieve from those feedback sessions and the type of language, careful, diplomatic, precise, polite language that we use to give feedback and receive feedback. Thanks very much, guys. I'll see you in the next tutorial.